the person that has a fine line between the most underappreciated person in the history of Portland music and the Santa Claus of rock. And there's a big gap in between the two. But let me tell you about this person. Going way back in the Wayback Machine in the early 60s, he was involved with the Marines, formed a band, actually got gear out of the Marine headquarters to form a band, play drums, and actually got signed and toured as a band, even though he was in the Marines. When he was done with that gig, relocated to Phoenix, did some other things, but happened to hang out at a studio in Phoenix and worked understanding the whole system of a recording studio that was owned by a cat named Waylon, who later became known as Waylon Jennings. Relocated to LA, was working around music, did band stuff, was playing in bands around the LA basin, also learning production skills and networking like a mug at the same time. At some point, it's still kind of gray with me, connected with Sun Music, which was basically Louis money through one of the cats, the Kingsmen, that were pushing out a system where bands would have amplification for tours and on-stage presentation. Was involved at Monterey, the Monterey Pop Festival, was one of the lucky few who actually heard Jimi Hendrix doing his sound check where everybody went, because that was such a new thing. This inductee was involved with Buffalo Springfield, was responsible for signing Jimi Hendrix to Sun, was responsible for signing The Who and Pete Townsend and John Entwistle and Keith Moon to Sun, was also working with Cream and got them involved with Sun, which was a Portland company. Actually had the distinction of passing on Led Zeppelin when they presented an acetate. Let's hear it for passing to Led Zeppelin. And I think what was happening was the guy was going, hey, I got Townsend, I got Hendrix, I got Clapton. What the hell am I going to do with Led Zeppelin? So anyway, later ended up in Portland working with Gibson and a company that owned Gibson and Moog, working with guys like Don Felder from the Eagles, Tom Petty, Buddy Fight, Willie Nelson, Ron Wood. And the thing that really gets me the most about this guy, before he started his publication, was that he was instrumental getting John Entwistle to go to the mayor's office in Portland and sitting down with Mayor Bud Clark, who in my personal opinion is the best mayor we've had in a hell of a long time. And got Mayor Bud Clark to buy into having a thing called the Mayor's Ball. The first year the Mayor's Ball paid off Bud Clark's campaign debt. The next 7 years the Mayor's Ball raised $400,000 net for children's charities. And what happened after that? When Bud was gone, the ball ended. Sad but true. In 1979, our inductee opened his own local paper, trade magazine for the Oregon music scene. This is after he had worked for Billboard in Nashville and also had worked for Backstage Pass, a magazine that he had founded, I believe, in LA. This guy has got more connections than Band-Aid. I mean, this guy is amazing. And when you talk about Two Louis magazine, which is a magazine that Buck Munger founded in 1979 and ran for over 20 years, that is just the frosting on the cake to the story of this guy, Buck Munger, who has touched so many lives and so many people, and now he's a part of rock and roll Oregon music history. Buck Munger, get your butt out here. You're now part of the Oregon Music Hall of Fame. Okay, go to the podium.
He's got to tell him I'm not going into the middle of it.
So which is it? The most misunderstood guy in Portland music or the Santa Claus of rock and roll? Oh, you're gonna get the dirt now. You know, I was in the music business for about 10 years before I started Two Louis. 10 years in Portland. I worked for Gibson Guitars and Loeb Synthesizers, and I basically traveled around the world with the best musicians, and I would come home to Portland, and in my basement I had a studio run by Tom Grant and a guy named Richard Burdell. And because those two guys, who I'm sure their names you recognize, I met a lot of great musicians in Portland, and so when the corporation finally said to me, it's time to relocate, we're bringing you home, I said, I think I'll stay in Portland and hang with my peeps. And so for 25 years, Two Louis followed the careers of the musicians in Portland. We tried to be a trade publication. We tried not to be a fan magazine. We tried to talk about bands that were getting recording deals and publishing deals and advancing their careers and getting the hell out of here was the big deal. And, you know, when you do a free publication for 25 years, it takes a lot of people volunteering a lot of time, doing a lot of crap work, and getting spit on at gigs because you were from Two Louis. Two Louis! But you know, we did our job. And there are a few people I'd like to thank, just a few people. First of all, I'd like to thank David Lycan because I went back and looked in the archives, and I found in the first issue of Two Louis, the lead story was David Lycan pissing and moaning and bitching about the fact that Pleasure got no respect in Portland. And that sort of set the tone for the magazine for the next 25 years. We got mad when you guys didn't get respect. So anyway, other than David, I'd like to thank Marlon McLean. Marlon McLean doesn't get nearly enough credit for what he does. Marlon McLean was the first real record producer in Portland, Oregon. And if you were a band in Portland trying to get a record deal, if you didn't have a Marlon McLean record, you weren't really real. Marlon did records for, I think, Sequel, and I think he did one for Crazy Eights, and he did one for Dan Reed Network, and it was a rite of passage for about the first 5 or 6 years in Portland. So Marlon, thank you, because if it hadn't been for you, we would have had no success stories to write about. And I'd also like to thank Bart Day, a lawyer in Portland, a music lawyer who wrote for us for 25 years for free. And I don't know how many careers he saved, but he must have saved a bunch because he taught you guys about music publishing and trademark and copyright and all that crap. And I remember Alf Ryder in the Billy Rancher band said to me, you know, Buck, I read Bart Day, but it's kind of like reading about AIDS. You know you should read about it, but you really don't want to. All right, I'm going to rip through the people here who made Two Louis happen in the long term. One of them was Ford Pearson, a young man who joined us at 19 years old. And he helped us get started, and then he went away and had a great career in advertising, came back 2 or 3 times. Every time we needed a good idea or a phone guy, he would come back and help out. And Ford is also one of the original architects of the Oregon Music Hall of Fame, so you wouldn't be here if Ford hadn't done his deal, okay? And I'd like to thank Michael J. Kersey. He was the first byline writer in Two Louis. He was the first player who came forward and said, I think I understand what you're trying to do. And then there was Michael Adelstein. He came aboard from Long Hair, and he wrote everything in the magazine for like 2 or 3 years. And then Dan Lissy came over from Millennium. He was there for a long time. Michael Moran and Gustavo Rappaport gave us photographs that separated us from the other low-rent publication. Dennis Jones, who is now in New York, and who was Casey Nova's bass player, was the first salesman for Two Louis, and actually the guy who convinced me to do it. He was the guy who said, the bands need it. Kim Roadruck was our designer. Rest in peace, Kim. She put us together 2 or 3 times, made us look really good. S.P. Clark was a reviewer for us forever. Tim Curran was one of our first salesmen. He's now the publisher of the Mid-County Memo and a big supporter of the music business. And if you read his cover story on the Oregon Music Hall of Fame in the Mid-County Memo and Terry Robb, you would know that it kicked the ass of Willamette Week. Really, really. And I'd like to
Behind the Scene magazine to come over and take pictures for 2 Louis. Thank you, Pat. And I'd like to thank Denny Malore, who is a working musician and wrote for 2 Louis for the last couple of years and is still out there wearing his 2 Louis jacket, and thank you, Denny. I'd like to thank Gary Bukozinski for many great photographs, and he'll hate me for using his real name. I'd like to thank Bill Phillips, who never actually wrote anything or took any pictures for 2 Louis, but he was the captain of the best goddamn softball team in the music business, the Oregon Rock All-Stars. What do you think? Undefeated in radio station competition. Proud to say that. And I saw Mark Bosnian outside earlier. Mark was a big star for the Oregon Rock All-Stars. And finally, I'd like to thank David Jester, who gets no fucking respect in this town and has videotaped every single band since 1979, has them in his archives. And thank you, David. And finally, I'd like to thank my trophy wife of 25 years, Jane Boston. 25 years. Like in a couple of days, 25 years. Jane is the operations manager of Jake's Famous Crawfish. Listen to this. Listen to this. If you can show documentation that you voted for me, Jane will give you a free drink and a shot at the dessert tray. All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I love you all. This is the greatest town in the world to be in the music business. God bless you.
Right on!
Buck Munger. Buck Munger, everyone.
Munger.
Well, if you needed any other evidence that it's getting late in the evening, I do have an announcement. There is a dark blue van, license plate 335 TAP.